In this one, I'll be attaching the shelf fronts to the shelf boards, and then I will sand, stain, and poly all of the rest of the face frames for the base cabinets. Time to start making some shelving. These rips are 1.25 inches. I always use maple with the shelving because after I poly it, it's a pretty good match with the pre-finished plywood. Here I'm cutting up the shelf fronts and matching them up with their plywood counterparts. And the procedure is to put the plywood into handy. Make sure that I pick the top and bottom of what's going to be the top and bottom of the shelf. I glue it, smear the glue. I make sure that the shelf front is sticking up a fuzz all the way across the entire shelf. And then nail it on there. I use 18 gauge finished nails and do a 5 nail pattern. That way there's one in the center, and then it's pretty easy to space it out without having to measure anything. And then after it's nailed together, I put 2 of them in the clamp and clamp them together, clean it up. I kind of clean it up as I go. I want to make sure that that fuzz is sticking up because later I'm going to do some more work to it. Same procedure, just over and over again. I'm jumping around doing different things because I've only got so many clamps. "15 or 20 minutes in the clamps usually seems to work unless there's some sort of a problem. Otherwise, I just juggle everything, making sure that I've got something going on while the clamps are in use. Very little sanding to do on the actual faces of these. There's a lot of sanding elsewhere. But one thing that I do want to mention is you never want to sand the face frames where 2 cabinets come together, where 2 face frames touch. This is the stain they picked. Gotta look for the swirlies. I need a flashlight to find the swirlies. Can't see it until it's stained, but they will pop. Got these 2 little areas that I'm gonna put the maple plywood. And I need to do some special sanding on these 2 face frames. Because of what I mentioned earlier, you don't want to have any sanding where face frames touch each other. But right here, that's where that little cabinet goes in between the 2. So that's why I'm sanding on that outside edge. He's staining away. Look at him. I was in between painters. Sand in the place where you live. Hell no. That's too happy. It was a cold, dark night, and he searched for swirlies as he sanded his life away. He continues his search. Now I'm going to pop all the rest of the face frames off. Most of them just have 4 screws. sanding, and swirching. Swirching and sanding. He finally made it through the dark night. I'm getting a handle on the face frames. The plan is to throw these base cabinets in first because I've got other things to work on. So I'll have to make a whole video about poly. I've got a lot of tips about polyurethane. One is to make sure that nobody puts your syrup bottle, the one that's in the garage, in the house. I do 2 coats with the foam brush. They are heavy coats. This is after the stain. Make sure everything's laid down nice and flat. I believe this is the second coat. This is satin poly. It's the only kind of poly that I use or recommend anyone ever uses. But you do have to make sure it's stirred up, because if it's not stirred up, it's not satin. It'll be more of a glossy, semi-gloss looking finish. This is definitely a slow paint job. I wouldn't recommend anyone do this that's interested in being a painter. This is an anti-painter type of a paint job, in my opinion. You know, I'm holding out against getting spray equipment and becoming an actual painter. I'm holding out. I don't know how long I can hold out, but I don't do this very often. And I would say that this is probably the easiest DIY friendly type of paint job that someone could do that didn't want to invest a bunch of money in paint gear. Because I will end up with a very professional looking paint job when this is done. But don't take my word for it. Just wait. The trick is to do the top coat with the rattle can. Now that these first 2 coats have dried, we're going to hit it with some 220 and make sure that I do not go through the poly. All I'm trying to do is smooth everything out. And now that I've got the sanding done, I'm just going to hit it with some mineral spirits, basically tacking it off, and then hit it with the air, and it's ready to spray. These cans cost about $8. The cheapest place to get them is Walmart. Make sure you get satin. This whole job only took about 8 rattle cans and almost a full gallon of poly. So with sandpaper, foam brushes, and the poly, I probably had about $150, maybe $160 in material. Looks pretty good.
Now is a good time to call your mum and tell her you've made it.